on obstruction of Congress. Now, interestingly, that was one thing that Mitt Romney was divided by. He didn't see cause for obstruction of Congress. It is a difference and a contrast for many people inside that room. It's a different test. This relates, doesn't it, to the heart of whether or not Donald Trump unduly obstructed documents and witnesses from being released.
Right. I mean, we expect probably the vote will be very similar, but could be slightly off. But yes, I mean, this is the question of whether the administration, not just the president himself, but his administration had to turn over these documents and allow people to testify to the House. And, you know, there were some people that said, well, he's allowed to do that. He's allowed to say he doesn't want people to testify and to take that issue to court. The court never fully resolved all of these issues. Some of those were moot as the case went forward, and so we don't really know how that is, how that's playing out. One thing we do know is that when the Democrats took over the House, even way before this Ukraine matter came to light, you know, that was the White House's, stance, was that they didn't want to provide information. They felt like the House was going too far in trying to hold them accountable, and that they had the authority, the legal authority, to hold back and not provide those witnesses and provide those documents. And that's why it ultimately went to the courts. Not fully decided, though, so it'll be interesting to see what happens here. The vote will probably be very similar, though.
Yeah, we've heard from Republicans, haven't we, time and time again, that it was Democrats in the House, it was their responsibility to get all the information and evidence. The Senate wasn't meant to be conducting a fact-finding mission. It was the responsibility of the House to put forward their case. But do you think that this Senate trial has changed the way perhaps future impeachments will look at executive power and how much the president is able to do?
Well, that's definitely what both, some Democrats are saying, but also if you talk to sort of constitutional experts or experts that are experts in impeachment, they say that this case will show that the president is allowed to take so many different actions, can do so many different things, and that future presidents will look back on this and say, well, look, I can do this because Donald Trump did it. And so there's a real fear that future presidents will say, I have the authority to do all sorts of things that they never thought they had before. So, it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. I noticed that in these last few weeks, we've talked a lot about how things went during the Clinton impeachment, the impeachment of Bill Clinton 20 years ago. And it's just natural that you look back on the last case and see how things have been done. So the next case, whenever that is, in 5 years or 100 years, they'll probably look at this impeachment trial and take some lessons from that. So, it's unclear what's going to happen, but it does seem like the president is wanting to give future presidents more power.
Anita Kumar from Politico, thank you very much for speaking to us. And joining me now from San Francisco is Brett Bruen, a former White House Director of Global Engagement and a U.S. diplomat. Mr. Bruen, what do you think this impeachment means for the future? The Senate will inevitably acquit Donald Trump on both these articles of impeachment, but where does it leave us in the future?
Well, I'm going to just talk about the present for a moment, because I have grave concerns that Donald Trump is going to hit the accelerator and really feel emboldened by this acquittal. And we've got now 10 months until a presidential election. Clearly, the Congress is saying we are not going to do our jobs. We're not going to engage in oversight. And so he can take that as a green light to continue, not only in the kind of manner that he has, abusing power and really ignoring a lot of the rules, but go even farther. And we saw this in 2018 in the run-up to the congressional elections here in the U.S. I fear we're headed back down that path.
And Mr. Bruen, do forgive me if at some point I have to interrupt interrupt you because we're just waiting for that final vote tally on this second article of impeachment, obstruction of Congress. And that was something that Democrats, I think, have struggled more to prove. And the Republicans' arguments have been, there has been a vast array of them, but they say this wasn't their responsibility to try this case. It was down to the House to get all the witnesses and all the documents that they needed when they first looked at it. Do you think that Democrats have handled this well, or are there potentially learning points here for them?
Well, absolutely, there are learning points, but let me just address this question of whether or not the Senate had a duty to gather evidence and to call witnesses. You have the National Security Advisor, the former National Security Advisor, John Bolton, saying that I have relevant information that should be shared with the Congress, with the American public, and they ignored it. They chose not to take that information, and that is not just a constitutional issue. I would argue it is a danger to our country if there is relevant information about how our national security is being managed that was ignored by the Senate. So I think there are a lot of very pressing questions, and there will be further investigations, perhaps in the next Congress, as to what happened in the Trump White House.
Mr. Bruin, sorry to interrupt you there, but I think we have a final vote tally from the floor of the Senate related to this second article of impeachment that Donald Trump was faced on. And 53 senators voting to acquit Donald Trump, finding him not guilty. Let's see if we can just take a listen.
The United States guilty as charged. 53 senators have pronounced him not guilty as charged. 2/3 of the senators present not having pronounced him guilty. The Senate adjudges that respondent Donald John Trump, President of the United States, is not guilty as charged in the second article of impeachment. The presiding officer directs judgment to be entered in accordance with the judgment of the Senate as follows. The Senate, having tried Donald John Trump, President of the United States, upon 2 articles of impeachment exhibited against him by the House of Representatives,
acknowledge a few of the people who helped the Senate fulfill our duty these past weeks. First and foremost, I know my colleagues join me in thanking Chief Justice Roberts for presiding.
And we're joined now again by Mr. Bruin, former Director of Global Engagement at the White House. A historic moment. Donald Trump acquitted by the Republican-led Senate of abuse of power and obstruction of Congress. A moment that Donald Trump will be very pleased with and undoubtedly emboldened.
Without question. And as I said earlier, I think he will feel renewed energy, and the Congress has pronounced its verdict. At least Republicans in the Senate have said, you know what, we are not going to be a check on your power. And that's a really dangerous equation, one that our founders, when they wrote
Today's news. Potential learning points for Donald Trump as a result of this impeachment investigation. Do you think it is pause for thought that there are things that he should learn from this?
Hi, Cordelia. Thank you for having me on the show. I think that President Trump will probably be a little more careful in the way he goes about foreign policy decisions. The entire Ukraine issue was preventable. He is the president. He did not have to use a back channel or side channel communication to achieve his objectives in Ukraine. So I think he probably will be a little more cautious. That said, Senator Susan Collins from Maine said that he's going to learn lessons from this, and she was rebuked by him. So it's very hard to tell him what to do. He's his own man, he's the president, and he makes his own decisions.
Yes, because he sounds emboldened, not contrite. I mean, he refute that he's done anything wrong here.
that's exactly right. He believes that he can make whatever decisions he wants to because he's the president. He sees the Trump-Ukraine issue as an extension of the Trump-Russia issue, which after a years-long investigation by the special counsel Robert Mueller and multiple different congressional committees, the Trump-Russia collusion issue was found to be a hoax, and it destroyed and damaged dozens of lives, and I was damaged as well. I was the national security director for Mr. Trump, and my life was completely upended for a couple of years over this, and a lot of other lives were too.
So where does this leave us? Would you be happy to see Donald Trump in the future potentially communicating with a foreign power about an investigation into another political rival? Would that be okay in your mind?
Well, the issue is that Joe Biden, when he was the vice president, he bragged essentially that he had the Ukrainian prosecutor fired, and basically he said at a think tank event with the Council on Foreign Relations, it was on national television later, that he bragged that he was going to withhold about $1 billion in aid unless they fired the prosecutor, and he said, well, they fired him. And at the same time, that Ukrainian prosecutor was investigating Burisma, a Ukrainian gas company on which Hunter Biden, his son, was on the board. Of course, that's corruption. For the vice president's son to be getting $50,000 a month with no experience to do it. So if that person was not running for president, that person would probably be investigated too. So really, the key issue is President Trump really should have not tried to do a side deal around the Congress using his personal lawyer, Rudy Giuliani. He should just do what he wants to do directly and make his case to the American people for why he did it.
What do you make of Senator Mitt Romney's comments? We know he is a critic of Donald Trump at times, but he said it was a very emotional decision process for him, that he simply could make no other decision but to convict the president, that he crossed a line. That's a pretty significant criticism. We have never seen a senator do that, to go against his party in that way.
Well, there's really not much of a downside for Senator Romney since he represents Utah, and of all the states that typically vote Republican, President Trump is extremely unpopular there. It's mostly Mormons, and they hold family values very dearly, and President Trump is kind of an anathema to a lot of Republicans in Utah. Plus, this is almost like a battle for the heart and soul of the Republican Party. Mitt Romney, of course, was the Republican nominee for president in 2012, and then Mitt Romney and others went to Trump Tower because Mr. Trump was a larger-than-life figure. They were basically going there to kiss the ring in 2012 to Mr. Trump. That's why Mr. Trump thought he could be president. If all these people like Mitt Romney were coming to him, why can't he be president? And he eventually won. So President Trump said things about Mitt Romney, like that he choked like a dog, things of that nature. He basically appeared to offer him the Secretary of State position, and then he rescinded it. He played games with Mitt Romney. So, of course, Mitt Romney wants to strike him back. So really, for Mitt Romney, even though it's very unpopular with the Republican base around the country, for him in Utah, there really isn't too much of a downside for him personally.
J.D. Gordon, thank you very much for talking to us. Well, we will see that historic vote get underway.